Captain Vex Thorani leaned back in his command chair, the blue glow of the holographic contract casting strange shadows across his reptilian features. The bridge of the Crimson Prophet hummed with activity as his crew prepared for their next job. But this contract was different. The numbers made even his experienced eyes widen. 50,000 credits per head, Lieutenant Corax repeated, his insectoid mandibles clicking in disbelief. The Zephyrian had been with Thorani for 7 years, and in all that time, they had never seen payment this generous for what seemed like simple pest control. The client's representative, an Altarian named Bex, stood nervously beside the holotable. His 4 compound eyes kept darting toward the exit, and his blue-tinged skin had taken on an unhealthy pale shade. Sweat beaded on his hairless scalp, despite the ship's perfectly controlled climate. The Kepler Mining Consortium is prepared to pay premium rates for premium service, Beck stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. That to interference has been ongoing for months. Our operations have ground to a halt. Thorani's scaled fingers drummed against his armrest. Something felt off about this whole situation. In his 15 years as a mercenary captain, he had learned to trust his instincts, but 50,000 credits per target was enough to retire on. Tell me about these settlers, he growled, his yellow eyes fixed on the nervous Altarian. Bex's skin grew even paler. They're Terran-descended, humans, just a small community that's been interfering with our mining equipment. Maybe 30 individuals at most. They've been stealing supplies, sabotaging machinery, basic bandit behavior. The bridge erupted in laughter. Gunner's Rack, a massive Carillion with arms like tree trunks, slapped his knee with enough force to dent metal. Humans? You're paying mercenary rates to deal with humans? Even Navigator Kix, usually the most serious member of the crew, allowed herself a rare smile. Her tentacles writhed with amusement as she spoke. Captain, my homeworld's children could handle a human settlement. Throughout the galaxy, humans had a reputation. They were known as the galaxy's softest species, short-lived creatures from a paradise world called Earth. Their planet had no natural predators, perfect weather, and abundant resources. Most aliens considered them pampered and weak, suitable only for diplomatic work or simple labor. They breed like Kandorian rabbits and die just as easily, Corax added, his translation device making his chittering sound like cruel laughter. No natural weapons, no armor plating, no enhanced senses. What kind of threat could they possibly pose? Thorani had to admit his crew had a point. The only humans he had ever encountered were merchants, diplomats, or tourists. They were always polite, always peaceful, always backing down from confrontation. The idea of humans as bandits seemed almost comical, but the money was real. 50,000 credits per head meant 1.5 million credits for a single job. Enough to buy a new ship, upgrade their weapons, maybe even retire to one of the pleasure worlds in the core systems. What kind of equipment are we talking about? Weapons specialist Vex asked, her cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the contract details. Are these humans armed? Bex's nervous fidgeting increased. Basic civilian equipment, improvised weapons at best. They're just persistent, and they know the terrain better than our security teams. Terrain advantage, Thorani mused. What's Kepler 442b like? Challenging environment, Bex admitted reluctantly. High gravity, toxic atmosphere in some regions, aggressive local wildlife, but nothing a professional team can't handle. The crew exchanged glances. They had worked on Deathworlds before. Vex still had scars from their job on Xerion Prime, where the plants tried to eat anything with a heartbeat. Corax had lost 2 limbs on Savage's world before his cybernetic replacements. If humans could survive on a challenging world, it just meant they were tougher than average humans. Still nothing compared to professional soldiers. What happened to the consortium's regular security? Thorani asked. For the first time, Beck seemed to struggle for words. They requested transfer to other assignments. Union regulations, you understand. Can't force employees to work in hostile conditions indefinitely. Something in the Altarian's tone made Thorani pause, but the contract's payment schedule flashed temptingly on the display. Half payment up front, half on completion. No questions asked about methods. We'll take the contract, Thorani declared, pressing his scaled hand to the biometric scanner. The deal sealed with a satisfying chime. Bex practically ran from the bridge, clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. Within minutes, the first payment hit their account. 750,000 credits, more money than most mercenary crews saw in a year. What none of them noticed was the speed of Bex's departure, or the way his compound eyes had shown unmistakable relief when the contract was signed. They missed the slight tremor in his hands, and the way he whispered something that sounded like "forgive me" as he left their ship. As the Crimson Prophet prepared to depart for Kepler 442b, the crew celebrated their good fortune, already planning how to spend their shares of the massive payday. 3 weeks of hyperspace travel brought the Crimson Prophet to the edge of the Kepler system. As they dropped out of warp, the first thing that hit them was the planet's appearance on their view screen. Kepler 442b looked like something out of a nightmare. "By the 7 moons of Corax," whispered Navigator Keeks, her tentacles recoiling from the sensor readings. "Captain, this planet is trying to kill everything on it." The world spun below them like a diseased eye, its surface covered in swirling storm systems that never seemed to rest. Lightning flickered constantly through the atmosphere, creating an endless light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. The oceans glowed with a sickly green color that spoke of chemical reactions no sane being would want to encounter. "Atmospheric composition is 70% toxic to most known species," reported scanner operator Zix, his cybernetic implants working overtime to process the data. "Acid rain covers 80% of the surface at any given time. Wind speeds average 200 kilometers per hour. Weapons specialist Vex checked her equipment one more time. "Good thing we brought the heavy armor suits. Regular gear wouldn't last 5 minutes down there." As they descended through the planet's violent atmosphere, their ship shook like a toy in the hands of an angry child. The Crimson Prophet was built for combat, not atmospheric flight, and every bolt and rivet screamed in protest as hurricane-force winds tried to tear them apart. "There," Zix called out, pointing to his scanner display. "Northern Valley, just like the client said, human settlement confirmed." Through the swirling clouds and acid rain, they could make out a collection of basic structures huddled in what looked like the only stable area on the entire continent. Simple rectangular buildings, no defensive walls, no energy barriers. It looked exactly like what they expected from human colonists, primitive, vulnerable, and completely unprepared for professional soldiers. 23 life signs, Zix reported. All human, all concentrated in the main settlement area. No vehicles, no heavy equipment visible. Lieutenant Corax clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. "Like shooting fish in a barrel. We'll be done before lunch." They landed their ship 2 kilometers from the settlement, hidden in a rocky outcropping that provided some shelter from the endless storm. The moment the airlock opened, they understood why this planet had no tourists. The air burned their eyes, even through their helmet filters, and the constant sound of wind and rain was loud enough to damage unprotected hearing. "Squad Alpha, move in from the east. Squad Beta, take the western approach," Thorani commanded through the comm system. "Remember, we need to make this look like a raid gone wrong. No witnesses, no survivors, but make it messy enough that other groups won't ask questions." The assault began at dawn, though on Kepler 442b, dawn was just a slightly less dark version of night. Thorani led Squad Alpha through the rocky terrain, their heavy boots splashing through puddles of water that glowed faintly with chemical contamination. As they approached the settlement, something felt wrong. The buildings were too quiet, too still. No lights, no movement, no signs of the morning activity you would expect from a farming community. "Scanners still show life signs," Zix whispered through the comm. "But they're spread out now, moving through the settlement. Probably hiding," Gunnersrack rumbled, his massive frame barely fitting into the largest armor suit they had. "Humans are cowards. They'll surrender as soon as they see us." They breached the outer perimeter at exactly 600 hours. The first building they entered was completely empty, but showed signs of recent habitation. Warm food still sat on tables, and clothing hung on lines as if people had just stepped outside for a moment. "Ghost town," muttered Corax, his weapon, sweeping the empty rooms. Where did they all go? That's when the ground beneath their feet exploded. The blast threw half of Squad Alpha 20 meters into the air. Those who survived the initial explosion found themselves in a world of chaos and confusion. Smoke filled the air, mixing with the planet's toxic atmosphere to create a fog that their helmet systems couldn't penetrate. "Contact! Contact!" Thorani screamed into his comm, but the radio was filled with static and screaming. Through the smoke and confusion, shapes moved with deadly precision. Major Li Tay emerged from what had looked like solid ground, but was actually a perfectly camouflaged bunker entrance. Behind him came soldiers who moved like they were born in this hellish environment. They wore armor that seemed to blend with the planet's surface, and their weapons fired with surgical precision. "Welcome to Kepler 442b, Li's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority. "You're trespassing on human territory." These weren't farmers. These weren't colonists. These were soldiers, professional, experienced, and completely adapted to their environment. Every movement showed years of training. Every shot found its target, and every tactical decision was perfect. Squad Beta's panicked voices filled the comm channel as they encountered the same deadly reception on the western approach. Explosions echoed across the valley as hidden mines and traps activated, turning their carefully planned assault into a nightmare of friendly fire and confusion. "Fall back! Fall back!" Thorani ordered, but retreat was easier said than done. The humans had turned their entire settlement into a killing field, with every building, every rock, and every path designed to channel enemies into predetermined zones of destruction. Specialist Kix tried to reach the extraction point but found her, path blocked by creatures that seemed to emerge from the planet itself. Later survivors would realize these were humans in camouflage so perfect that thermal imaging couldn't detect them. When the smoke finally cleared and the surviving mercenaries regrouped at their ship, they counted their losses in horror. Of the 20 soldiers who had begun the assault, only 9 made it back. Half of Thorani's professional team had been eliminated in less than 30 minutes by what the client had described as primitive settlers. As they sealed the ship's airlock and began emergency medical treatment for their wounded, one fact became, pull back to the ship." Thorani screamed into his communicator, his voice cracking with panic as explosions echoed through the valley behind them. The retreat was chaos, wounded soldiers stumbling through acid rain, equipment abandoned in the mud, and the constant fear that death was watching from every shadow. The surviving 9 mercenaries ran through the toxic landscape, their heavy armor suits sparking as acid droplets ate through the outer plating. Behind them, the human settlement burned with fires that seemed to laugh in the face of the endless rain. "2 clicks to the landing zone," gasped Navigator Kix, her tentacles wrapped around a wounded Carillion, whose arm hung at an impossible angle. "We can make it. We can still make it." But when they crested the final hill and looked down at their landing coordinates, Thorani's heart stopped. The rocky outcropping where they had hidden the Crimson Prophet was empty, not destroyed, not damaged, just gone, as if their ship had never existed at all. "Captain," Lieutenant Corax's voice was barely a whisper, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. "They took our ship. We're stranded." Thorani activated his emergency scanner, sweeping the area desperately. No debris, no scorch marks, no signs of a struggle. Somehow the humans had moved a 60-ton combat vessel without leaving a trace. "How?" Weapons Specialist Vex demanded, her cybernetic eye spinning frantically as it searched for their missing. "Ride home." "How do you steal a ship without anyone noticing?" The answer came in the form of a voice over their emergency comm channel, calm, professional, and terrifyingly human. "Attention, mercenary forces. This is Major Li Tay, Kepler 442b. Defense Corps. Your vessel has been relocated to a secure facility. Surrender now and we'll discuss terms." "Terms?" Thorani snarled into his communicator. "We're professional soldiers, human. We don't surrender to farmers." Li's laughter was like ice water in their veins. "Farmers? Captain, you really should have done better research on your targets." That's when they realized the terrible truth. The humans weren't letting them leave. This wasn't a failed assault they could retreat from. This was a hunt and they were the prey. What followed was 7 days of pure nightmare. The mercenaries had trained on dozens of hostile worlds, fought against pirates and rebels across 3 star systems, and survived battles that would have killed lesser beings. But nothing had prepared them for this. The humans used the planet itself as a weapon. When Gunner Zrak tried to find shelter in what looked like a safe cave, acid spitting, creatures drove him back into the rain, creatures that seemed to ignore the humans completely. When the mercenaries tried to cross a valley during a brief break in the storms, the ground itself came alive with carnivorous plants that had been lying dormant until human signals awakened them. "They're not just surviving here," Kix whispered. On the third night, as they huddled in the ruins of an ancient volcanic formation, "They're controlling this place, like it's their personal weapon." Sergeant Kim Min was their invisible death. The human sniper picked off stragglers from distances that should have been impossible in the planet's chaotic atmosphere. Corax lost. 2 fingers to a shot that came from over a kilometer away, during a lightning storm that should have made targeting impossible. "No one shoots like that," Vex muttered, trying to treat Corax's wounds with their dwindling medical supplies. The atmospheric distortion alone should make long-range shooting impossible. But Kim Min knew this world like others, knew their own homes. Every wind pattern, every magnetic field fluctuation, every way the toxic atmosphere bent light and sound. What seemed impossible to outsiders was just another day at the office for someone who had spent years mastering this environment. Lieutenant Park. So was even worse. The human moved through the toxic forests like a ghost, always one step ahead, always knowing exactly where the mercenaries would go next. Worse, Park was turning their own equipment against them. On the 4th day, their emergency shelter collapsed when someone hacked their portable habitat system. On the 5th day, their water purification unit started producing poison instead of clean water. By the 6th day, even their armor's life support systems were unreliable. "It's impossible," Thorani raged, checking his equipment for the 100th time. "Our systems are military-grade, quantum encrypted. No one should be able to access them remotely." But Park So wasn't accessing them remotely. The human was getting close enough to physically tamper with their gear, then disappearing before anyone could spot them. Every piece of equipment became suspect, every system potentially compromised. It was on the 7th night, when only 5 mercenaries remained alive, that Thorani finally accessed his ship's archived mission database through his emergency communicator. What he found made his blood turn to ice. 17 mercenary groups had taken contracts for Kepler 442b over the past 5 years. The Stellar Hawks, Corax's killers, the Voidborn Legion, names that were legend in the mercenary community. Professional, soldiers with decades of experience and enough firepower to level cities. None of them had ever returned. None of them had ever sent a distress signal. They had simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. "Captain," Kix's tentacles were trembling as she processed the same data. "The payment amounts. They're all identical. Same client. Same representative, same story about primitive settlers." The truth hit them like a physical blow. They weren't the first. They weren't even the 10th. They were just the latest group of fools who had fallen for the same trap, lured by money that seemed too good to be true because it was exactly that. As lightning flashed across the toxic sky and acid rain drummed against their failing shelter, Thorani realized they were facing something far worse than skilled soldiers. They were facing humans who had turned warfare into an art form. And this hellish planet was their canvas. 6 survivors huddled in the wreckage of what had once been a proud mercenary company. Thorani stared at the faces of his remaining crew, Corax with his missing fingers, Kix whose tentacles had turned pale from poison exposure, Vex whose cybernetic eyes sparked from acid damage, Zix whose scanner implants barely functioned, and Zrak whose massive frame was now hunched with exhaustion and fear. They had taken shelter in an abandoned mining facility, its metal walls providing temporary protection from the acid rain. But Thorani knew it was only temporary. The humans were out there waiting, watching, planning their next move with the patience of apex predators. That's when Zix's damaged scanner equipment picked up something unexpected. Human communication. Signals. The transmissions were encrypted, but the blast that had damaged his implants had also scrambled their security protocols, allowing him to intercept fragments of conversation. "Colonel, this is Sergeant Kim," came a voice through the static. Crystal clear, professional, and terrifyingly calm. Confirmed elimination of targets 7 through 11. 6 hostiles remaining. Thorani's blood turned to ice. They were talking about his crew like items on a shopping list. "Copy that, Kim," replied another voice, deeper and commanding. This had to be their leader. "What's your ammunition status?" "Plenty left, sir. These mercenaries are using standard galactic armor. Our modified rounds punch through it like paper." Modified rounds. Thorani looked down at his armor, which had seemed so powerful just a week ago. The humans had been studying mercenary equipment, for years developing weapons specifically designed to counter their gear. "Colonel, this is the 4th group this year," Kim continued. "The Kepler Mining Consortium is getting persistent with these contracts. Then we make sure the message gets through this time." The colonel's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "No survivors, no witnesses. That's how we maintain operational security." Vex grabbed Thorani's arm with her remaining functional hand. "They're farming us," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. "They're using us for target practice." Another. A voice crackled over the intercepted channel. "Lieutenant Park." So the ghost who had been haunting their every move. "Colonel, I've got 3 more targets in the Western Canyon, moving to intercept." "Negative, Park. Let them come to us. The canyon leads to the old processing plant. We've got that area prepared." Prepared. The word sent chills through every survivor. These humans weren't just fighting them. They were herding them, controlling their movements like pieces on a game board. Through the static, they heard more details that painted a picture too horrible to believe. The humans had turned the entire planet into an elaborate death trap. Every possible shelter, every water source, every seemingly safe path had been surveyed, mapped, and rigged with surprises. "Kim, how are our special friends in Sector 7? The colonel asked. "The acid spitters are well fed and active, sir. I've been dropping mercenary rations near their territory for months. They're very protective of that area now." The creatures that had driven them from shelter weren't wild animals. They were pets, trained and fed by humans who understood their behavior better than any xenobiologist. "Park, status on the equipment traps?" 17 mercenary weapon caches recovered and repurposed. Their own plasma rifles are now part of our automated defense grid. "The irony is beautiful, sir. Every piece of equipment they had lost, every weapon dropped by fallen comrades, had been collected and turned against them. The humans were using mercenary technology to kill mercenaries, creating a feedback loop of death that grew stronger with each failed assault." Zix's implants picked up more transmissions, these from different human positions across the planet. There weren't 30 humans in this settlement. There were over 100, spread across the entire continent in a network of hidden bases and underground facilities. "Outpost 3 to base. We've got the mercenary ship fully analyzed. Weapon systems integrated into our defensive grid. Armor plating repurposed for our bunkers. Even their food supplies will feed our people for months." They weren't just killing mercenaries. They were absorbing everything. Technology, resources, intelligence. Each defeated group made them stronger, better equipped, more dangerous. "Base. To all units," the colonel's voice cut through the chatter. "Commence final phase, drive the remaining targets toward the northern facility. Time to finish this dance." Thorani finally understood the full scope of their situation. These humans hadn't just survived on this death world. They had transformed themselves into something far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They had become the death world. Every storm was their ally. Every toxic creature was their partner. Every piece of hostile terrain was their weapon. They hadn't adapted to Kepler 442b. They had made it adapt to them. "Captain," Kix whispered, her tentacles trembling as she processed more intercepted data. "I'm picking up references to other planets, other human settlements. This isn't the only one." The implications hit them like a physical blow. If there were more worlds like this, more human military units who had decided to disappear into the galaxy's most hostile environments, then the HFY mercenary community had a much bigger problem than anyone realized. "They're building something," Zrak rumbled, his deep voice filled with dread. "This isn't just about defending their territory. They're creating a network." As if to confirm their worst fears, the colonel's voice came through the static one more time. "All units be advised. Intel suggests the consortium is planning to hire the Crimson Legion next. Begin preparation of trap scenarios for heavy assault units. We'll need bigger bait. Thorani realized with growing horror that they had never been the hunters. From the moment they had accepted that contract, they had been prey. The humans had been watching, planning, preparing to add 6 more bodies to their collection of trophies, and somewhere in the galaxy, another mercenary captain was probably looking at a contract for Kepler 442b, thinking about easy money and soft human targets. The trek to the northern pole took 3 agonizing days through terrain that seemed designed by the universe's cruelest architect. What remained of Thorani's crew had been reduced to a desperate march of the walking dead. Korax's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely, his alien equivalent of going into shock. Kix left a trail of blue blood behind her from wounds that wouldn't heal properly in the toxic atmosphere. Only 4 of them remained now. Zix had fallen to one of Kim Min's shots during their second night, and Vex had simply vanished during a bathroom break, leaving only her damaged cybernetic eye behind. The abandoned research station appeared through the swirling snow like a mirage of salvation. Its dome-shaped structure rose from the ice, built by some long-dead civilization that had tried and failed to tame this world. Solar collectors hung broken from its sides, and the entry port stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow them. "Shelter," Zrak gasped, his massive frame struggling against winds that could knock over military vehicles. Finally, some shelter. But as they stumbled through the entrance, something felt wrong. The interior was too clean, too organized. Emergency lighting cast a warm glow over surfaces that should have been covered in years of accumulated dust and debris. Equipment hummed quietly in the background, and the air itself felt breathable despite the toxic atmosphere outside. That's when they saw him. Colonel Young-Du stood at the center of the main chamber, hands clasped behind his back, looking like he had been waiting for them for hours. He wore the same camouflage gear as his soldiers, but there was something different about him, an authority that seemed to fill the entire space. Behind him, scattered across tables and mounted on walls, was a museum of death. Weapons from a dozen different species lined the walls: Carillion heavy guns, Zephyrian energy blades, Altarian sonic disruptors, all bearing the insignia of mercenary companies that no longer existed. Armor pieces were arranged like trophies, each set telling the story of professional soldiers who had met their match on this hellish world. "Captain Thorani," Jung said, his voice cutting through the howling wind outside with casual ease. "You're the last one." Thorani's weapon was in his hands before he realized he had drawn it, but his finger froze on the trigger. Something in the human's posture, in his complete lack of concern about facing armed enemies, made it clear that pointing guns at him was pointless. "Why?" Thorani gasped, his species equivalent of tears freezing on his scaled cheeks. "We were just doing a job, just following a contract." Jung's smile was sadder than any expression of anger would have been. "So are we, Captain. This planet is our home now. We chose it specifically because it would deter casual visitors. But occasionally, someone like your employers gets greedy enough to ignore the warnings." The colonel gestured to the equipment, scattered around the station, and Thorani finally understood the scope of what he was seeing. This wasn't just gear from his crew, or even from the 17 previous groups he had learned about. There were weapons and armor pieces from dozens of different mercenary companies, representing hundreds of professional soldiers who had come to this world and never left. "The Void Stalkers," Jung said, pointing to a distinctive helmet with 4 eye slots. "They specialized in zero-gravity combat, thought they could use the planet's low-pressure zones as an advantage." He moved to another display. "The Crimson Reapers, known for their brutal efficiency and advanced weaponry, they lasted almost 2 weeks. Each trophy was a story, each piece of equipment a grave marker for warriors who had thought themselves unstoppable." "You were never meant to succeed, Captain," Jung continued, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "You were meant to disappear. Every group that vanishes here adds to our reputation. Every failed assault makes the next employer think twice. Eventually, even the greediest corporations stop sending people." Thorani's legs gave out, and he fell to his knees in the toxic snow that had blown through the station's open entrance. The full weight of their situation, not just his crew's death, but the systematic elimination of hundreds of mercenaries. Over the years, crashed over him like a landslide. "How many?" he whispered. 43 mercenary companies over the past 8 years, Jung replied without hesitation. 2,736 professional soldiers, each. One convinced they were different, each one certain they could succeed where others had failed. Behind Jung, movement in the shadows revealed more humans, not farmers, not settlers, but soldiers whose eyes held the cold calculation of apex predators. They had been there all along, invisible, until they chose to be seen. Jung pulled out a small recording device, its red light blinking in the dim station lighting. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "This is Colonel Jung Do, Kepler 442b Defense Force. To any mercenary crews receiving this transmission, this world is under human protection. We strongly advise against future visits. What you've heard about Deathworlder Special Forces is true. We never leave living witnesses, we never leave loose ends, and we never forget." As the recording device continued to capture his words, Jung looked directly at Thorani with something that might have been pity. "Your employers will receive this message along with your ship's black box data. They'll know exactly what happened here, and they'll make sure other potential contractors know as well. Your deaths will save more lives than your lives ever did." The station's emergency systems activated, sealing the entrances as the planet's nightly toxic storm began to rage outside. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Thorani could see lightning that burned green and purple, illuminating snow that glowed with radioactive minerals. "Why record it?" Thorani asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Why not just let us disappear like the others?" Jung's expression softened slightly. "Because you asked why. Because you deserve to understand that this isn't personal. Captain, it's just necessary." The recording device continued its work, capturing the final moments of another failed assault on humanity's chosen fortress world. Months later, when salvage crews finally located the wreckage of the Crimson Prophet in the planet's southern hemisphere, they would find Jung's message in the ship's black box, along with detailed records of every mercenary group that had attempted to claim the bounty on Kepler 442b. The message would spread through the mercenary community like wildfire, adding another entry to the growing list of worlds marked "Contract Forbidden" in red letters that meant certain death. And somewhere in the galaxy's corporate boardrooms, executives would look at proposed contracts for human settlements and remember the fate of 44 mercenary companies who had underestimated the species from the pleasant little world called Earth. The last sound Thorani heard was the storm outside, singing the planet's eternal song of death and desolation, while inside the research station, human soldiers prepared to add his crew's equipment to their growing collection of trophies. The End.